212 million years ago in what is today New Mexico. A dry spell has touched what was once a lush and thriving forest. All of the waterways have slowed to a trickle. And a chance lightning strike has struck the dried-out forest and resulted in a conflagration, a massive forest fire that is now threatening to swallow up acres upon acres of land. Fleeing from this fire is Tawa. She is a carnivorous dinosaur, perhaps only the size of a German shepherd, but she is the shape of things to come. Her mouth is full of sharp, serrated teeth. Her hands have powerful, grasping claws, and her powerful hind legs help carry her away from this coming disaster. Ever alert, she is cautious as she rushes past a local waterway, fearing the giant amphibious metoposaurs and the crocodile-like Phytosaurs that prowl in the shallows. But on land is no better. There, she has to watch out for other carnivorous dinosaurs, like the Coelophysoid and the bear-sized predator Vivarone, a relative of modern-day crocodiles, covered in armor, walking on 4 legs and with a massive, tall skull filled with even sharper teeth than Tawa. This day she is fleet of foot enough to escape from the fire, with temperatures raging at nearly 600 degrees Fahrenheit. 212 million years ago, New Mexico was not a place that this narrator would like to live. It was a strange ecosystem, a threatening ecosystem, but one of the most important ecosystems on the planet for understanding the dawn of the age of reptiles. And in the present day, that spot in New Mexico is one of my favorite places on planet Earth. I'm Adam Pritchard, and this is Pastime. If you travel to modern-day Albuquerque, New Mexico, and drive about, an hour and a half north, you enter into the landscape of the Colorado Plateau. This high desert environment is characterized by just some of the best records of the geologic history of Western North America anywhere. Lots of red and yellow rock formations, dotting the highways, flat-topped mesas everywhere, dried-out arroyos that fill up with water during the monsoon season, big open skies. It's just one of the most beautiful places in the American landscape. And it's been populated by Native American tribes for thousands and thousands of years. Now, in the late 19th century, cattle ranching by European Americans became a pretty common way of life out there. Now, Ghost Ranch itself is perhaps best known as the artistic backdrop for Georgia O'Keeffe, who's famous for paintings of things like flowers and the beautiful and desolate landscapes of New Mexico. But as a paleontologist, I knew Ghost Ranch for something substantially different from that. If you open just about any children's dinosaur book, you find an animal called Coelophysis. This is a coyote-sized predatory dinosaur with a long, almost swan-like neck, a small head full of rows of sharp teeth, and just an overall slender build. This is not a particularly large animal, and it's known from the late Triassic period of Western North America. And any kid's dinosaur book worth its salt talks about where Coelophysis was discovered in abundance, and that is at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. The area around Ghost Ranch preserves some of the best fossil records from the Triassic period, these early stages in the age of reptiles and in the dominion of dinosaurs in the ecosystems of Earth. I'll let my friend and colleague paleontologist Randy Ermis of the Natural History Museum of Utah and the University of Utah shed a little more light on it.
The Triassic is particularly cool for a number of reasons. First of all, you're dealing with a time that was bracketed by 2 major mass extinctions. At the beginning of the Triassic, about 252 million years ago, the Permian mass extinction, and then you get recovery from that extinction, and then faunas are hit again at the end of the Triassic, about 201.5 million years ago. Also, you've got really the origin of modern terrestrial ecosystems, so that is ecosystems on land and in freshwater bodies. A lot of the things we see today living on land had their origins in the Triassic.
Now, vertebrate fossils from the Triassic period are abundant in modern-day western North America. If you go to Arizona, you can go to New Mexico, you can go to Colorado, you can go to Utah, and you might find fossils from this critical period. But there's one particular problem that a lot of researchers, including myself, have with these materials. They tend to belong to relatively large-bodied animals. So things that are maybe over a meter or 3.5 feet or so in length. And if you look around any ecosystem in the world, you'll see that animals of that size are relatively uncommon. Unfortunately, because the fossil record tends to be biased towards pretty big things. I mean, they survive the process of fossilization, they survive the hundreds of millions of years of weathering, of tumbling in rivers, a lot better than the fossils of small-bodied things. That leaves us with a gap in our understanding. It's a gap that unfortunately includes a lot of dinosaurs and their early relatives during the Triassic period when they were relatively small.
We always think about dinosaurs as these, quote, ruling reptiles that dominated the Mesozoic era for 150 million years, but they really had quite humble beginnings about 230 million years ago. And for about their first 10 to 15 million years, they were really small bit players in their ecosystems, and small both in terms of the number of species and how abundant they were, as well as their body size. But starting about 215 million years ago, they started to become more dominant players in the southern continents, in sort of an area we call Gondwana, but when all the continents were still together in a supercontinent called Pangaea. And it wasn't until the end of the Triassic, about 201 million years ago, that dinosaurs became dominant in North America. And subsequent to that, that they really became these big players in their ecosystems.
And it's a gap that's been filled, at least in part, by incredible fossils out at Ghost Ranch. Now, the first fossils of Coelophysis and Coelophysis-like dinosaurs from the Ghost Ranch area were described by paleontologist Edward Drinker Cope. I've seen the original fossils that Cope described from Coelophysis in the collections of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, and to be honest, they're okay. I mean, there's bits of the legs, there's bits of the pelvis, there's bits of the backbones, but it's really not a great sample of the skeleton, and it leaves a lot of gaps in our understanding. However, in the 1940s, a team of paleontologists led by paleontological legend Edwin Colbert went back to the Ghost Ranch area, and on Ghost Ranch land, they discovered something remarkable, what is now known as the Coelophysis Quarry. This is a remarkable site that preserves literally thousands of skeletons of this species of carnivorous dinosaur piled on top of each other. They're almost inextricable. If you look at a chunk of rock from the Coelophysis Quarry, you're liable to find multiple skeletons, like 3 or 4 skeletons in the space of just a couple feet. Rather than excavating individual bones, the team from the American Museum took out these massive, like car-sized blocks of rock that are now found in museums around the United States and even in Canada. There's, a big block at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. There's a big one in the Yale Peabody Museum in New Haven, Connecticut. There's a big one at the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard. There's another big one in the Los Angeles County Museum in Los Angeles. There's a big one at the New Mexico Museum of Natural History in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And there's a really big one at the Ruth Hall Museum of Paleontology at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. Despite being excavated in the 1940s and then in a second round in the 1980s, these car-sized blocks remain, in some ways, largely unstudied. There's still pretty dense fossils that haven't even been uncovered yet. Now, most of the material is Coelophysis, but there are some remarkable small-bodied animals, some of those animals that are less than a meter or so in length, and therefore filling some of those gaps in our Triassic understanding embedded in those rocks. But I'm going to leave those a mystery for today. I might have something to say about them in a couple months when a certain paper of mine comes out. For now, we're going to go back a little further in time. Now, although fossils were discovered in abundance at the Coelophysis Quarry excavations, there really weren't any comparable large-scale excavations of Triassic fossils from the Ghost Ranch area following the 1980s. In the year 2002, an archaeologist named John Hayden was leading an archaeology class as part of a Ghost Ranch summer course. Due to some substantial fire hazards that summer, Hayden couldn't lead his class where he intended to on Forest Service land, so instead he took them on an impromptu trip across the highway from the location of the Coelophysis quarry. Wasn't expecting to find much, but while looking in some grayish-green mudstone deposits, he and his class discovered some beautifully preserved, black and blue, almost oil-colored fossils of vertebrate animals. These he took to the paleontology curator at the Ruth Hall Museum, Alex Downs. Alex is a character. He is an extremely accomplished preparer of fossils. He has cleaned up some of the most difficult preparations. He leads groups of all ages on fossil tours all over the place in Ghost Ranch. He's super excitable, loves to talk about the Ghost Ranch fossils. And if you put Ghost Ranch fossils in anything but the smallest possible box to save the most space, he will tell you about it. And he got super excited when Hayden showed him these incredible fossils. He started leading summer courses to the area, which became known as the Hayden Quarry. And he started finding lots of different specimens, lots of different evidence for different species there, including what seemed to be the fossils of early dinosaurs. Now, since those had only really been discovered in abundance at the Coelophysis quarry, that was a big deal. And Alex was keen to tell someone about it. I'll let my colleague, Dr. Sterling Nesbitt, who's now a professor of geology at Virginia Tech, shed a little more light on where he came into the story.
Alex Downs and I were discussing how to prep Coelophysis from the Coelophysis quarry in the fall of 2004. And during one of those conversations, he mentioned he had a small dinosaur from Ghost Ranch. So he also contacted Randy and I and suggested that we should come look at this material. So we met up at the Denver SVP in 2004. Alex brought a box, a very small box, with 2 or 3 upper leg bones or femora, part of a pelvis, and a few vertebrae. And because Randy and I have been looking at early dinosaurs and their close relatives from Argentina to North America, we're able to say right away that this small femur belongs to a brand new dinosaur. Alex invited us out to come see the locality that he found this specimen at. We came out in 2005 during the summer, saw what else had been collected, and our jaws kind of dropped because there's more than just this little dinosaur. It was a close relative, a silosaur, was also found with coelophysoids and this new small dinosaur. We went out to the quarry. We were able to excavate for about 2 hours and found 3 more dinosaur tibiae, which is incredible because that almost doubles the number of dinosaur tibiae outside the Coelophysis quarry in all of the American Southwest. So we knew this was a special place right away. A year later, we got funding through National Geographic and really opened up the quarries. We took off lots of overburden, set up pretty much a grid system where each person could excavate in a certain area. And after about 15 days, we were able to find exactly where Alex had found that tiny little femur, went in and found about 7 partial individuals of what later became Tawa.
And so, every summer since 2005, this team of paleontologists has been going out to the Hayden Quarry and excavating fossils for a period of about a month. The original 4 included Randy Ermis and Sterling Nesbitt, who we've already heard from, but also Nathan Smith, now a curator of dinosaurs at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles, and Alan Turner, a professor of anatomy at Stony Brook University, and my former PhD advisor, and subject of the 2nd episode of Pastime. Early on in the project, they were joined by Michelle Stocker, an expert in the anatomy of phytosaurs and now a geology professor at Virginia Tech, Sarah Werning, an expert on growth in reptiles, now an anatomy professor at Des Moines University, and Kevin Padian, an advisor to Randy and Sterling, and a professor of evolutionary biology at the University of California in Berkeley. As time went on, the crews just got bigger and bigger. As the original 4 project founders became professors, they started bringing graduate and undergraduate students out. And that's how, in summer of 2010, I got to join them for the very first time. When you're staying out at Ghost Ranch, it's usually considered a pretty cushy camping experience. There's a nice bathhouse nearby that has shower facilities and running water and toilets, an ice machine, absolutely critical for keeping your drinks cool, but you're still camping out in a tent in the local campground area. In the morning, you rise around 7:30 and gather all your supplies and pack a lunch to go out to the quarry for the work day. We drive from the campground to just across the highway from the entrance to Ghost Ranch and walk out to the site, across the creek, through the weeds and prickly pear cactus to the gray hills that mark the Hayden Quarry. At the beginning of the season, we clear off what's called overburden. This is all the piles of dirt and mud that have built up since the end of the past season, and also some of the dirt that was piled on at the very end of the last season in order to keep the fossils that were exposed protected. Once the overburden is cleared off, the real work begins. We dig through the soft gray-green mudstone, usually with simple hand tools, things like an awl, a screwdriver, or even a dental pick. And honestly, the fossils are so abundant that if you don't find something within, say 15-20 minutes, you're probably doing it wrong. The first thing you find that has that same black, shiny color as the bone probably isn't bone. Frustratingly, there's charcoal and burned logs all throughout the site. It's probably the most abundant fossil material that we find. However, this wood has been critical to understanding the paleo environment and how hot and treacherous a place the Hayden Quarry environment was. Work by environmental scientist Jessica Whiteside of the University of Southampton in the United Kingdom has been critical to really understanding the highly unstable environment, using a variety of measuring techniques to look at the records of carbon isotopes inside of that burned wood. She's not only been able to determine the high temperatures that the wood burned at, over 600 degrees in some cases, which is just really hot, but also suggesting an environment characterized by huge fluctuations in precipitation, lots of flooding that help make this such an unstable environment. But honestly, if it's so unstable, who would want to live there? In terms of large-bodied animals, in the water, we have two main players. On the one hand, we have the salamander-like Phytosaurs. These giant amphibious animals, maybe ranging in size from a foot to up to 6 feet long, had gigantic heads that are honestly, they're shaped like toilet lids. They look absolutely ridiculous, and their eyes are positioned way at the front of the snout. But these bizarre animals had tiny, sharp, needle-like teeth all over their jaws, suggesting that they were predators in the aquatic environment. But they weren't alone. Alongside them, and easily the most abundant four-footed animal fossils that we find in the Hayden Quarry site are the Phytosaurs. These sharp-toothed predators had long, tapering snouts filled with sharp, needle-like teeth at the front and then serrated teeth at the back of their jaws, suggesting that they were predators not all that different from modern crocodiles. But the way the skull is put together is totally different, suggesting that this was an independent evolution of this long snout, flat-skulled aquatic predator role in the ecosystem. The nostrils in these animals, unlike a croc's, which are positioned right at the tip of the snout, are actually on a little almost volcano of bone positioned just in front of the eyes. So these Phytosaurs are kind of like fake crocs with blowholes. On land, one of the only major herbivorous animals that we see in the ecosystem are the Aedosaurs. Aedosaurs are distant relatives of modern crocodiles that were covered in thick plates of flat, bony armor. Some of the animals actually had massive shoulder spikes, which, if you know about dinosaurs, sounds an awful lot like the ankylosaurs, but those would only emerge long after the Triassic period. Aedosaurs have little leaf-shaped teeth that probably would have been very good for cropping plants, and a weird sort of upturned pig-like snout. But the armor of the Aedosaurs would have been key to keeping them safe from the Rawasuchians. The Hayden Quarry ecosystem has its own exclusive species of Rawasuchian, the animal Vivarone haydeni. Vivarone would have been a tall-skulled animal with a head that honestly looks something like a tyrannosaur or an allosaur, but perched on top of a powerful armored body with long arms and long legs, suggesting a quadrupedal animal. This was about the size of a black bear, so it's not an animal that you'd want to run into in the ecosystem. Now, closely related to Viverone, you have an animal that looks almost nothing like it. These are the Chuva Swords, also about the size of German shepherds, with tiny arms with tiny little hands, but with a limb structure that's suggestive of relative of crocodiles rather than dinosaurs. These bipeds had long, slender necks and toothless jaws and very large eyes. I mean, they honestly look a lot like ostrich dinosaurs, like Gallimimus or Ornithomimus. Only these ostrich mimics appear in the fossil record long before those kinds of dinosaurs ever evolved. The one from the Hayden Quarry site is only known from fragmentary skeletal remains that are currently being worked on at Stony Brook University. Now, another animal from the site, one of the more mysterious ones, is another relative of Viverone and the Shuba Sword. Right now, it's only really known from isolated leg bones, but those bones show that this animal was a crocodilomorph. That is, it belongs to the lineage that will eventually lead to the modern-day crocodilians. During the Triassic period, crocodilomorphs did not look a whole lot like modern-day crocodilians. They had very long legs overall. They walked upright. They had armor, but not necessarily as dense or as thick as the armor of modern-day crocs. And their heads were small and not nearly as flattened top to bottom like a modern-day croc. They were basically much better adapted for living on land. And although we don't have a lot of the Hayden Quarry crocodilomorph at this point, the evidence we have suggests that it was one of these terrestrial predators. In the ecosystem, it probably filled a role similar to a small predatory dinosaur, in contrast to the aquatic predator role that modern crocs tend to fill. One animal that's honestly really hard to fit in anywhere else is called Vanclevia. This was an aquatic predator with an elongate, serpentine body, a side-to-side flattened tail which it would have used to swim through the water, much like a modern gray crocodilian, and it was armored. And when I say armored, it went all out. Every part of Vanclevia's body, from its neck to its throat, to its arms, its legs, its tail, its belly, was covered in plates of bony armor that locked together to form a pretty complete shell. And it's these armor plates that are the most commonly discovered fossils from this animal at Ghost Ranch. Add to that almost comically small arms and legs, a stubby face, and a mouth full of flattened, sharp teeth, and you have a pretty impressive 3 to 5 foot long aquatic predator swimming in the same waters as those Metoposaurs and Phytosaurs. Now, what really put the Hayden Quarry site on the map was a 2007 science paper by Dr. Ermis and all of his colleagues about the Dinosaur Morphs from the site. When they really recognized what they had at the site, it was unique among fossil sites from the Triassic of Western North America. Not only do you have dinosaurs of many different sizes, you also had dinosaur relatives, kind of cousins of dinosaurs, that were previously known only from older deposits in South America and Europe. At the bottom of the size scale, you had the rabbit-sized animal Dromomeron. This little biped had skinny legs, probably only 2 functional toes on each foot, long slender legs and tiny arms. This would have been a fleet-of-foot little animal running among the brush. Slightly larger, you have the Silosaur. This was the only herbivore dinosaur relative known from the Hayden site. It would have looked something like a mini long-necked dinosaur, a mini sauropod, with longer, slenderer legs, long, slender arms, a jaw full of leaf-shaped teeth, and a little beak at the end of the lower jaw. Then you have the animal that I opened with, Tawa. This is a unique kind of theropod carnivorous dinosaur from the Hayden Quarry site, with large, powerful teeth, long arms with powerful claws on the ends of them, and a strange assortment of anatomical features that suggests it's very primitive on the carnivorous dinosaur line. And then you have the Coelophysoid. This was an animal that's closely related to the later occurring animal Coelophysis that we talked about at the beginning of the episode. This would have been a little bit bigger than Tawa, but relatively similar in anatomy, probably with a longer, slenderer snout with more teeth, but a similar sort of bipedal look. Now, the last and most mysterious of all the dinosaurs from the Hayden Quarry site is D Soros. another theropod meat-eating dinosaur about the same size as Tawa and potentially closely related. But Chindisaurus is only known from isolated leg bones, so we don't have much of this animal. It's also one of the few dinosaurs from the Hayden Quarry site that's also been recognized in another area, the Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. Unfortunately, with so little material of Chindisaurus, we can only really begin to understand the anatomy of this animal. But that's part of what keeps us going back. Now, I confessed in the episode where we introduced our new co-host, Catherine Early, that I am not actually a dinosaur expert. Although I know a bit about dinosaurs, they haven't really been my area of study. No, I study small reptiles at the Ghost Ranch site, and there are some weird ones. The first one that I published on was an animal called a Tanystrophiid. This was an animal that had a body kind of similar to a modern-day monitor lizard. Unlike some of the other reptiles like the dinosaurs, its limbs would have sprawled out to the side. It would have been low to the ground. But the neck of this animal is what really made it strange. It was probably about half or more the total length of the animal. So basically take a lizard body and add just tons and tons of neck and perch a tiny, tiny little head full of needle-sharp teeth at the end of that. The Tanystrophiids were previously known primarily from European fossil sites, where there are some true giants, animals that are the length of vans. The animal from the Hayden Quarry site is probably less than 3 or 4 feet in length, but its discovery in this dry and temperamental environment in Western North America was kind of a shock because they'd previously been known mostly from marine and lake deposits. What they were doing in the ecosystem? I don't know. Maybe they were eating small amphibians and fish. They're mostly known from isolated bits and pieces, which we were able to identify using special anatomical features. But there's sure to be more to discover in terms of these weird, long-necked critters. My personal favorite, though, are the Drepanosaurs, which got their own episode of Pastime earlier. These were superficially chameleon-like animals that had what looks like a claw at the end of the tail for hooking onto branches, long grasping toes on the feet, and a massive claw on their index finger on the forearm. That's actually the biggest bone in the entire arm of a Drepanosaur. I published on that amazing arm last year, but there's a lot more secrets for the Drepanosaurs from the Hayden Quarry site to produce, so stay tuned. So at the beginning, I started talking about animals that are upwards of 9, 10 feet in length. Then took us down to the dinosaur size, which are all around the size of your average house pet. Then we take it down again with the size of the Tanystrophiids and Drepanosaurs. But one of the big pushes, led by Dr. Jennifer O'Leary of the State University of New York at Oswego, has been to take the size scale even further down with the microvertebrates. These are the tiny, tiny, tiny pieces, like the size of the head of a pin or smaller, of small fish, amphibians, and reptiles that dot the landscape all over the Hayden Quarry site. Using special sieves and water straining techniques, Dr. O'Leary and her students have been working diligently to try and understand what's at the very bottom of the size scale. And there are a lot of fossils, including small reptile limb bones, that honestly, we don't know what they are yet, because no one's really seen fossils at this scale from a Triassic site in Western North America, at least not been able to identify them. So there are a ton more mysteries that we still have yet to solve about what was living in the Hayden Quarry ecosystem. There's still so many mysteries to solve, not only about the identity of some of these animals, but scientists like Sarah Werning and Chris Griffin are still working at understanding how these animals grew. So scientifically, we not only have this incredible transitional ecosystem right at the beginning of the age of reptiles that played host to not only dinosaurs and their relatives, but also gigantic predatory and herbivorous relatives of crocodiles that dominated Triassic ecosystems in North America, and these small, strange reptiles that played interesting and divergent roles in the ecosystem. What keeps me coming back as a scientist are those mystery fossils. There are so many specimens, so many tiny animals that probably were common in the ecosystem that we don't understand anything about. We don't know even what they are. And once we understand what they are, only then will we be able to place them and the whole ecosystem into a bigger context of reptile evolution at the dawn of the Mesozoic era. But it's not just as a scientist that I like going out to Ghost Ranch. When I first came out in summer 2010, I hadn't slept in a tent since my days as a Cub Scout. I had never really spent a lot of time out in the wilderness with scientists. I didn't know how things were going to go. But then the first night, Randy Ermis helped me set up my tent. And I started, cracking jokes for the first time with Alan, my advisor. And I got to know Sterling and Nate. But it's not just those project heads. I've gotten to know a lot of students of paleontology, of geology, while out at the Ghost Ranch site. People like Sarah Werning, Liz Ferrer, Sarah Tulga, Carrie Levitt, Chuck Beithole, Keegan Melstrom, Ben Breeden, Rob Katz, Katie Criswell, Chris Griffin, Candace Stefanik, Caitlin Kaleri, Emily Lessner, Jake Ganpad, Adam Lang, Adam Marsh, Zach Morris, Ben Kliegman. And I know 99.9% of you have no idea who any of those people are. But all of them are people I consider friends, colleagues, and all of them I've really gotten to know while out at the Ghost Ranch site. A field site can be so much more than a chance to discover new truths and new facts about natural history. It can also be a place to really connect with people that have those same interests. I don't know if you encounter this, but not all of my friends and family are as obsessed with fossils as I am. But by going out to a field site, you have a chance to really connect with people who were drawn to that place for the same reason you were. At this point, 7 years after I first started going out there, it's kind of like going to a family reunion. Except instead of hanging around eating food, you're face down in the dirt most of the day, digging for fossils, unless you get rained out. And I think I'll close with a bit of advice. If you want to know whether going into paleontology, or indeed I think any scientific discipline is right for you, go out into the field for a while. Get to know a team of scientists. Get to see how their students are. Get a feel for it. Because if you do, and you like what you find, you're probably on the right track. If you want to see fossils from the Ghost Ranch site, you can go to museums across the United States. The American Museum of Natural History, the Yale Peabody Museum, Museum of Comparative Zoology in Harvard University, the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology in Alberta, Canada, and many, many more. If you want to see some of the fossils we recovered from the Hayden Quarry site, you have to go to the Ruth Hall Museum of Paleontology in Abiquiu, New Mexico. That's actually on the Ghost Ranch property. And honestly, if you're really interested, take a look at the Ghost Ranch website and try and get involved. There's a paleontology course there every summer that gives you the opportunity to dig for the Hayden Quarry fossils. I helped teach the class in 2013, and honestly, it's a lot of fun for paleontologists of just about any age. Regarding Pastime, check us out on Facebook at Pastime Paleo. Give us a like. Give us a review on iTunes. Honestly, that's probably the most useful thing anyone can do as a listener. Check us out on Twitter. I think that's all the social media. And with that, I'm Adam Pritchard, and we'll see you next time on Pastime.